Greetings and salutations, everybody. It is E. Spencer Kite and Harry Powell. It is the Severe Takeaways. We are back. It's nice to be back. We had a little week break. We thought about doing something, and we said, you know what? It's good to keep this to covering events. Keep the takeaways specifically to being takeaways from live events. So last week, Harry and I jumped on and taped a hot topic, which you can find on the Severe Patreon. It's near the start of the month. Go and subscribe to that. Get all of that delicious content for just a $5. SevereMMA.com/pints, the best URL in the business. We are here today to discuss UFC on ESPN, Thompson versus Holland, UFC Orlando, as I lazily took to calling it all week because that's just the easiest naming nomenclature for me. Before we get into the action itself, good Sir Powell, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you. I am well. You will notice a slight change in background since the last takeaways, I suspect. We are over in the London household. We are in the process of changing the walls from black to potentially grey, maybe staying white. Not sure yet, up for debate. But yes, I am well. I'm excited to be back. I'm excited to be doing takeaway things. I have reorganized my desk, so there's far more space here. We're doing well. We're doing well.
And we also have a Millennium Falcon over your left shoulder.
We have a Millennium Falcon, thanks to my good wife. We also have, you can't see, but just here is a Darth Vader Lego head. She doesn't watch these, so I can tell you what I bought for Christmas. For Christmas, I have bought her an R2-D2 Lego, which is about this fucking big, and she's going to build that gleefully, I'm sure, on Christmas Day, which means I won't have to hear from her, and I can play the games and do the things. So.
See, I was thinking you were going to mention the Stormtrooper, and I was going to be like, she already found that.
Yeah, she did already find the fucking Stormtrooper. Yes, she did, yeah.
Nice of you to have the secret surprise secondary backup Star Wars Lego. This is, see, men listening and watching to this show, take note. That is the proper way to do Christmas. The one that she's going to discover because she's going to find it. And then the super secret backup one that still blows her socks off. That's the key. He's learning. He's doing
Fourth
well.
Christmas deep, boys. Fourth Christmas deep.
Well, we are several episodes deep on the takeaways, and we are going to dive into UFC Orlando, which is headlined by Stephen Thompson earning a 4th round technical knockout win, corner stoppage win over Kevin Holland in a fight that was thoroughly entertaining. Certainly a fun fight to watch in terms of the action. You are making your hairy face, and I love it because it's the same thing I was feeling as everybody was ranting and raving online on Saturday about fight of the year. So we'll start there, and I'll just say my piece of that before you say yours. And that is, we've talked about it many times on this program. There's a difference to you and I between entertaining fights, which this was, chaotic fights, action-filled fights, which this was, and then what I would put in the fight of the year column, which still belongs in my book to Matoish Gamrot and Arman Tsarukyan, because it's technical and it's skillful and it's back and forth, whereas this started back and forth and turned into a drubbing. Go ahead, good sir.
So I'm going to use the same line that I used when I chatted to Graham on Saturday or Sunday, whenever it was, and that was, this can't be the fight of the year because it wasn't an MMA fight.
We'll get to that.
I think that I understand my own bias, right? My own bias is that I'm looking for the beauty of applied technique. I'm looking for, like, to me, Corey Sandhagen and Piotr Jan is one of my fights of the year. And it was one of my fights of the year because I just was in awe of the technical capability of both fighters. And they were both doing exactly what you would want your fighters to do and still landing tons of damage on each other and still representing themselves and the sport at the highest pinnacle that we are aware of right now. I think for this fight, the other side of it, and this is incredibly harsh, but I think this is the darker side of what Sean's statement of we want to see the best fight the best when they are the best, is neither Kevin Holland or Stephen Wonderboy Thompson were their best in this fight. We have seen the best of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, I believe. And at 39 years of age, I don't think that's a disrespectful thing to say. But what we did see, regardless of Kevin Holland's decision making and how sort of genuinely sad that made me, and I'm going to go on a slight bit of a tangent here, but one of the things that really was heartbreaking in this fight was you saw Kevin Holland's stick and you saw that eroded away by pain and damage. And then you saw who Kevin Holland really was and is. And who Kevin Holland really is and was, you get to see at the end of the third and then the rest of the fourth. And that's that he realizes that he's doubled down on this personality so hard that he wanted to be done at the end of the third. He knew that that arm, the hand, the wrist, whatever it is that was broken was broken. And he knew that he wasn't going to be able to defend effectively with it. And he knew that the next 5 minutes were going to be torrid punishment. But because of the personality that he's built, you could see as he leaned over the bucket and he took the sips of water that he was saying to himself, I'm going to have to go out here. And I'm going to have to, beyond all deniability, try to live up to this shtick. And then in the fourth round, when everything was eroded away and it was just him at the foundations of his soul, it was just a man desperate to survive, just a man desperate to win, just a man desperate not to disappoint himself or his fans. And I think that was the heartbreaking thing for me. I thought the corner probably should have made more of an effort to question him at the end of the third. They didn't. He didn't question the hand. It was quite obvious that the hand was fucked the way he was holding it. I listened to comms for this fight because I wanted to hear what the story was. And it wasn't until Kevin at the end of the fourth said, please stop this fight, that the corner listened. And we've talked about this on other programs, on Speaker's Corner and the rest. I do think there should be more of a hierarchical systemic approach to when fighters are compromised. But I said it was a tangent. I'll get back to the actual question now. And that's that I just, this to me wasn't entertaining. Not from an analyst's point of view, not from a human perspective. This was a fun first round. And then it was a fighter becoming more and more and more compromised and eroding away. And I think that's why I lean into things like Arman Sarukian and Mateusz Gamrot. Mateusz Gamrot, Benny Daggers was very similar. Piotr Jan, Corey Sandhagen. The reason why I lean into those fights is because, yes, guys are taking damage. Yes, they are. One is losing the fight, right? One is winning the fight. But at no point is there a sobering realization that this is a gazelle on one leg and a lion baying for blood.
I think the point you make about the end of the third round, where Kevin Holland comes back and he says something about it's fractured and he's taking sips of water, that felt to me in watching it and in that interaction, Crew Bob Perez, his head coach, mustachioed gentleman, is saying, please make this an MMA fight. Please, can we just use all of the things that we have at our disposal? And it seemed like Kevin Holland saying it's fucked or whatever he said was the passive way of Kevin Holland saying, please get me out of here.
Yeah.
And the coach didn't. And to his credit, I really appreciated Bob saying in there, can we please make this an MMA fight? Because to me, in watching it, along with what you said about this deteriorating, that fight showed me, and look, I don't enjoy taking this victory lap, but I've been saying for a couple years now that Kevin Holland is not going to be this guy that everyone thinks he can be because he's unserious, because he, as you said, is far too committed to the shtick to be the best version of himself. And that's what we saw Saturday. The best version of Kevin Holland is that first round where he looks very good. And he has some very good moments. And I think if Kevin Holland ever decided, I'm going to be fully serious and give myself, let's say, 3 years of working with the best coaches, of doing all the right things, I think he can be very, very good. But he doesn't want to be. He just doesn't want to be. He wants to be the shtick. He wants to be like, he'll get more. This is the thing that I think is frustrating to me about this fight. He'll get more plaudits for that fight than actually going out and winning the fight by being the best version of himself. And that's something that doesn't sit right with me. It's something that feels off to me as we watch these fights and everybody goes nuts about this being fight of the year. It wasn't. The fourth round was an absolute one-sided ass kicking that Dan Miragliotta made an absolute mess of at one point that shouldn't have continued to the end of that round. It probably shouldn't have continued after the third round, as you said. And so to see the community revel in that performance kind of worries me a little bit for like where we're moving and where we're headed in terms of what we're celebrating, if that makes sense.
We're not headed anywhere. We are here.
This is just where we are. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm deadly serious. Like, we are here, and to me, some of this comes from the commentary.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Bisping made 2 calls. I agreed 100% with one, and I couldn't have disagreed more with the other. The first call, and the one that I disagreed with, was, I think it was the first. Could have been the second. Wonderboy Thompson gets taken down, right? And there's a moment when Kevin Holland establishes the takedown and then gets up. I can't remember whether that was first or second. I haven't got explicit notes like I have for the other fights, but Bisping says, "What a gangster."
Right.
That's the dumbest call I have
Correct.
heard in a long time. Like, that is DC-esque dumb. Because what we're doing here, and make no mistake about it, the commentary team is the face of the UFC on fight nights. On fight nights, what the commentary team says is a reflection of what the company wants. There is a truck in their ear that will tell them if they've said something egregiously wrong. They'll be feeding certain bits of information to them. They will have reads to complete, and a lot of those reads will be done by Mr. Anik. If you haven't watched the interview with John Anik, I have watched it 3 times now with Spencer. Go and watch it. It's very, very, very good. But
sir.
There is a responsibility for those commentators to represent the UFC, and what those commentators say as experts are listened to and absorbed by the people watching. And if they don't know any different, and they aren't there willing to bat against the erosion of change, then what they're going to believe is that Kevin Holland taking Wonderboy down quite clearly in a place where he was vastly superior, that's a gangster move to let him back up. That's egregious to MMA. And
Right.
That's not because I enjoy grappling. That's not because I wanted to see Kevin Holland necessarily take Wonderboy down and do the things. But we can't encourage the actions of anti-MMA. We just can't do that. And that's the way that MMA is going, is that we are more than ever, and you've said, and I've just said, that we are here. Kevin Holland is going to be celebrated for taking unnecessary damage and employing a game plan that, 1, didn't win him the fight, and 2, didn't win him any brain cells, and 3, didn't win him the other half of his purse. But instead, the plaudits won't go to RDA, who employed the best game plan to win him the fight.
Right.
And he looked fantastic in doing so.
Right. We get to a point, and it's funny that you mentioned, and it was Michael Bisping. It was in that first takedown. So they were talking about throughout the fight, throughout the initial round, how there was sort of this agreement between the two that we're not going to grapple. And Kevin Holland kind of falls into a takedown. It's not an actual, like, he doesn't look for a double leg or a trip or anything like that. They sort of collide and stumble and fall to the ground. And Kevin Holland's in an advantageous position. And in normal circumstances, he stays there. He does work. This is what we do to Stephen Thompson. This is how you beat him. The last two fights that he lost, beaten by wrestlers because they wrestled. And Kevin Holland lets him up, and Michael Bisping says, oh, that's gangster. Michael Bisping, for the last couple events, the minute a fight hits the ground, will jump into the broadcast and say, right, but it's not good if it doesn't mean anything if you're here. You got to be doing damage. You got to be moving forward. You got to be going. And if you're not, 30 seconds, we got to be up. And it's like, whoa, Bisping, I get it. You're a kickboxer, but like, this is part of the arts. This is one of the things. And it's true. It feels like we are, and you're right. It's not that we are getting there. It's that we are here. We are at this point where we are recognizing and we are applauding just the pieces that we like, just the pieces that we want to amplify and magnify. And look, it's not that, and we'll get to RDA and Brian Barberina shortly. It's not that they didn't call that fight properly, correctly, give RDA his credit and his due for taking the right approach and doing the right things and being dynamic on the ground. It just feels like we are separating ourselves from speaking about actual excellence in favor of the most entertaining. And the definition of entertaining is now no longer really great high-level fighting. It's shithousery and beatings and chaos. And look, I love a good dust up. I love a good bit of, there's not a lot of technique. Like, you want to let me watch Mike Trezano and Lucas Almeida on loop today? I'll sit down and enjoy that in the background all day. Great. Give me the chaos. Give me the lack of technique. But I don't want that celebrated as the pinnacle of this sport. And that's what we had a little bit on Saturday. Was here's the main event. Here's the highest fight of the night. And it devolved into sloppy, ugly, Stephen Thompson just out doing things.
I will immediately push back on sloppy and ugly. And I know that this isn't what you meant,
okay,
but I'm going
correct
to
it. Please do.
Stephen Wonderboy Thompson's Arsenal and array of
yes.
was the opposite.
Yes.
Sloppy.
Yes. I mean sloppy in the sense of it turned into a glorified sparring session where Stephen Thompson is getting his moves off.
Yeah, what it was karate combat.
Right.
In the UFC octagon.
Yes.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
And it was a guy that had, taken 3 rounds of pretty significant damage. There is another element to this. Right. And the other element, I text you immediately. And I said that when I was watching it, and I said, look, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson just isn't an elite welterweight anymore. And right. I think in that first round, the reason why I argued that Kevin Holland looked good is Kevin Holland looked like he had better timing than a 39-year-old who hadn't fought in 2 years. And when
1 year, just 1 year.
Oh, sorry, 1 year. Sorry, Wonderboy. Sorry. That's that. I've misquoted that on 2 podcasts now. I apologize. Near the end of the first round, you could start to see Wonderboy get the timing a little better. Like, he was getting the southpaw head outside, left hand down the pocket early, but it looked crowded, right? It looked like he hadn't.
It wasn't the cleanness that we're used to seeing him throw stuff with.
Right. And then near the end of the first round, he'd started to find his range a little better. He'd started to be able to find his footwork a little better. Then in the second round, that ramped up. In the third round, that ramped up. And then the fourth, he was like, I'm just going to do highlight reel things because why the fuck not?
Right.
And to me, that says more about where we are in Stephen Wonderboy Thompson's career that he is able to warm up. No fighter at the apex of a card should be warming up into fights. And I don't mean that in a Piotr Jan way or a Jose Aldo way where he might take a round off and do some things and come in and whatever. Like literally warm back into the idea of and the tangible nature of fighting. That shouldn't happen. And Kevin Holland was awkward and unorthodox in the first round, but largely that unorthodoxy and that awkwardness was ineffective in a longevity perspective, because Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is a supreme footwork artist. Let's just stop there before we get to the actual throwing of legs and stuff. A supreme footwork artist. That awkwardness and that unorthodoxy has to give Wonderboy problems with his footwork. And I think what was causing Wonderboy problem was the timing. He wasn't out footworking him like maybe a Tim Elliott or a Dominic Cruz can when they're being awkward and off and strange and weird. It was just that Kevin Holland was off balance a lot and he was overreaching a lot. And yes, he was catching Wonderboy. Wonderboy was like, oh, fucking hell, I haven't dealt with this.
Everything's coming at you at weird times, at weird angles, at weird momentums. Like Kevin Holland will jump in the air, then throw a punch, then land and throw another one while he's slipping. And it's an awkward thing to deal with when you are hyper technical Stephen Thompson that wants it to be you come forward and I circle and I know your patterns and I can recognize everything.
I said to Graham on the big podcast, and I'll say it again here, I think that Stephen Wonderboy Thompson has some longevity. He's a name. People love him. People love the character. People love the fighting style. It's very, 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 very difficult to adapt a karate / taekwondo kick heavy style into MMA, especially modern MMA. And I think that speaks to the level with which Wonderboy has operated on and can operate at. I just think we have to match him correctly here.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to see him against anyone ranked above him.
Agreed.
I think the fight I would like to see is, I mean, I don't know necessarily, but like in 2 or 3 fights, let's have Ian Gary and Wonderboy Thompson. Let's do something like that, right? Where Ian Gary goes in, gets a win, gets a couple of other wins. Maybe he's on a co-main event slot on a fight night card and Wonderboy Thompson's 41, right? Whatever he is. And then we can do here's an elite level veteran. And I mean that as in there are levels to everything.
Right.
And when he becomes, I mean, he's already a veteran, but when he reaches that veteranship, he certainly will be an elite level veteran. And just see how these fights go. But I have no interest whatsoever in Wonderboy Thompson in top 5 fights or title contention or title challenges at this point.
Yeah, I think the idea of Stephen Thompson being an elite welterweight went out the window officially. We saw it officially on Saturday. I think it was proven the 2 fights before this, but it's officially laid to rest. That's not to say that there isn't opportunities for him. We speak all the time about guys like Jim Miller and Andrei Arlovsky that have recognized, hey, look, I want to keep competing, but I can't compete at this level anymore. Let me take a step back. I think that's what Stephen Thompson needs to do. Now, of course, he said, as long as I'm competing, going into this fight, he said, as long as I'm competing, I'm chasing for that belt. That's the thing I want to do. Great. I understand the mindset, but that's going to lead to more harm than good. And so if he wants to keep competing, I agree with you. It shouldn't be anybody too far ahead of him in the mix. If there's another veteran guy, sure, fine, something like that. But otherwise, find some of these younger, interesting, fun fights for him.
What happens, just throwing this out there, what happens if McGregor comes back at 170 and wants a Wonderboy-esque matchup?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right.
I'd watch that. I'd 100% watch that. I'd love Stephen Thompson to get that payday as one of the, I know we say it all the time, but like genuinely one of the good guys in this sport, the sweetest, nicest man you're ever going to come across. I would love to see Conor McGregor try to create tension and rivalry. And
I don't think you would.
I don't think you would either. And it would be actually nice to see that side of Conor again, to see that recognition of this man is an artist and I'm an artist too. And we're equals and we're just going to go out here and do the things. I'd be down with that. That makes as much sense to me as some of the others, one of which we will get to now. As Rafael dos Anjos went out on Saturday, ran through Bryan Barberena, as we discussed on the preview show, sort of as anticipated, played to his strengths, said, hey, look, Bryan Barberena, you like to do these things. Well, I do those things better. We're going to go down to the canvas. I'm going to grab onto these submissions and you're going to go night-night. Now, he didn't fully go night-night. It wasn't really a rear naked choke. It's a neck crank. We can get into the arguments about those things. It doesn't matter. It's a great performance. It's a dominant win. And then he does the exact thing that our guy Ian O'Neill called for or suggested. And he did it in, honestly, it surprised me. I'm mad at myself that I didn't think of it. Because he walked out there and he was like, look, 6 years ago in this arena, I defended my title. I beat Donald Cerrone and I was supposed to fight Conor McGregor. Here we are. I just beat this guy and he's maybe coming back. Let's go. It's long overdue. It didn't get to happen. Let's have it happen now. And I sat on my couch in my den, recapping these fights, watching these fights, and was just beaming because it was perfect. And if we're going to do a ranking, if we're going to at some point do the like hierarchy of fights I want to see for Conor McGregor when he comes back, from a like animosity and we're going to get the fired up version of Conor and it's going to be a real goddamn test, I think RDA is at the top of my list.
I don't think that fight happens.
Neither do I.
I don't think Conor has the animosity towards RDA anymore. I really don't. I think that the Conor that was competing against RDA at the time was still was a very, very different Conor McGregor. He was a child in comparison to the Conor McGregor that he is now in terms of his mindset and where he is and all those things.
Yeah.
I don't think that Conor is going to be looking, in my opinion, either one of two ways. He's either going to be looking for a Michael Chandler, a Dustin Poirier, a Jorge Masvidal, or he's going to be looking at like a Donald Cerrone-esque, where whether it be a Wonderboy where he's not going to be super worried about Wonderboy trying to take him down or whatever. It's going to be a stand-up fight. It's going to be a way that he can maybe politically reintroduce himself to the MMA fans in a slightly different way. But I think it's going to be one of those two things. Yeah, I don't see RDA. And, you know, the other side of this is if Conor McGregor goes in against Michael Chandler and stops him, well, then we're calling for a title shot, right? Yeah. If Conor McGregor goes in and beats RDA, everyone's like, okay, now do the Michael Chandler fight.
Great.
It makes sense,
that's right,
for Conor to go and do the thing, given especially how much of a test I think that RDA could prove to be.
I agree. I'm still saddened by it. I'd love to see the fight. I would actually love to see Conor in a test like that, but everything you said is correct. We spoke of Stephen Thompson there. The differences between he and Rafael dos Anjos at this point, and they are both of the same age. They are both 39 years old. I know Wonderboy turns 40 in a couple of months. RDA just turned 39, I believe, a couple months ago. But for him to still come out and be at this level where it is clear that he is above the tier that Bryan Barberena resides in, which is to me the second 15, as I talk about regularly. He just came out and dominated and was like, yep, I'm here. I know my time as a title contender is probably beyond me because of that physique loss. So I may as well not cut weight, which he gets marks for, and just go out and have these fun fights and just go out and do these things because I still want to compete. I'm still super skilled. Let's just go and have fun. I'm in on this. I'm always all for this. You want to keep fighting. You want to show me the greatness that you possess. Let me see it. I'm in. There's plenty of guys in this division that fit that mold of people RDA can fight going forward. So let's just see some of them.
Look, RDA is going to beat a lot of dudes, right? I think that RDA is nowhere near the Neil Magny level where he's the gatekeeper to the top 15. I think RDA is like the gatekeeper to the top 7. right? Maybe the top 6. And what we saw, and the thing that impressed me the most about RDA's performance on Saturday, was just the variety and the unrelenting will to fight his own way. So the fight began, and Barberena was doing a lot of the very odd sort of hand movements and foot fakes, and he's sort of tapping RDA with some kicks and whatever. And RDA is kind of looking a little bit not dazed and confused if we're talking Led Zeppelin, but maybe just confused, right? He's half a Jimmy Page, and he's sort of trying to find a method to get a jab off or land a right hand. And he's kind of being, very tactically aware and doesn't want Barberena in the pocket and all of these sorts of things. And then eventually he's like, you know what? Fuck this, dude. And he just barrels in, lands the right hand, takes Barberena down and mauls him. And the thing that made me so impressed, and again, this is nothing new necessarily from RDA, but he threatens with 3 things. The first thing he threatens with is positional dominance. So you have to make a choice as to, you have to do the jiu-jitsu defensive stuff to make sure he's not passing your half guard or not passing into mount or taking your back or whatever it is, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is landing damage, right? So if he's not trying to positionally advance, he's trying to land damage, and he's obviously oscillating those 2 things together. But the third thing, I think, is something that is underlooked in his game, and it's grip advancement, right? And that's that he never relies on one grip set. He's going from Dagestani handcuffs to underhooks to shelves to pins to half hooks to back grabs to body locks to he's always looking to utilize the correct grips in the correct sequences. But he's also using grips that will favor him in the next 2 sequences and in the next 2 positional changes. And that, I think, is an elite part of his grappling game that Barberena, who is no slouch on the ground and knows his way around the canvas, just didn't have an answer for. And we saw it ramp up and ramp up and ramp up and ramp up. And RDA just continually wore him down with that trilemma, continually got to better positions. And when we got to the mandible strangle, which I don't think it was quite a face choke, quite a face crank. Generally what we see from face cranks is that your opponent's head is turned to the side, right? And then it's downward pressure on the jaw. Whereas there is what's called a mandible strangle, which essentially you drive the jaw backwards through the neck and through the esophagus, and it does actually choke you with your own jaw. It's not as clean and it's not as quick necessarily as when you're directly wrist under jaw, but it certainly is a choke. It's very painful, but it will put you to sleep. Whereas a face crank may just break your jaw, right? Fine, whatever, it's pain, no problem, but you won't go to sleep, right? But a mandible strangle, which is what RDA was looking for, certainly is a choke. Just a masterful performance. And yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and one that just sort of serves as that anytime we talk about tiers and levels in divisions and in terms of skill set, this is that reminder. This is that illustration. There's nothing wrong with Bryan Barberena topping out here. And I know Bam Bam's disappointed. He's frustrated that he loses. Everybody wants to win and move forward and all of those things. But there just comes a point where you run up against the guys that are just better than you. And RDA is just better than him. And there are very few people that are better than RDA in this division. You mentioned that he's sort of the gatekeeper to that upper 7 or 8. That's where he was. Even top 5 is where he was when he was there last, right? Challenged for the interim title, lost that. And then it was a series of losses to guys that all just moved up into that top 5, top 7. That's not a bad place to be. I say it all the time, right? That's good living if you can get it. That's a good gig if you can get it. Being the 8th best welterweight in the UFC. And I think that's about where he fits.
I think the other thing I'll say about this is full props to Bryan Barberena, because you go in against Robbie Lawler and you do the things against Robbie Lawler. Great, no problem. But you have no idea whether you have what it takes to beat an RDA unless you go in and fight the RDA, And there were moments in the second that he did get into the pocket and he did manage to land a couple of things. And they were fleeting moments, don't get me wrong. But there were moments in there where Barberena can go and take away and say, okay, I'm not at this level. I'm just not in my wheelhouse where I was able to get to the pocket. I wasn't able to sustain those pocket flurries. He was a better grappler than me. Fine. But certainly you can, as Brian Barberena, say, well, I'm definitely a top 15 fighter, you know?
Yep. We move to the flyweight division. Matthias Nicolau defeats Matt Schnell. Second round knockout. Just under 2 minutes in. This was Ian messaged me, our dear friend in the general, Ian O'Neill, messaged me during the fight saying, we basically called this to a T on the preview show of Nicolau is the more technical, more patient sniper of the two, is going to wait to find his shots. Did so, put Matt Schnell away. You had some thoughts, though, about Matt Schnell sort of being, it seems to you, a little bit caught between two styles and a little bit like someone changing his style that just isn't quite there yet. So I'll let you just sort of explain and discuss.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a controversial opinion. I don't really know, but I feel, and the fight sort of spoke to me in a way that first round Matt Schnell used to be, he'd have 2 kitchen sinks in his back pocket and he'd bring them both to the first round. He doesn't give one to his corner. There's no passing of kitchen sink with a handshake. He's got both in his back pocket and he loads them up and he takes them into that first round. And if Matt Schnell doesn't do his best work in the first round, then there are diminishing returns to the rest of his performance. Now, that's certainly not to say that he can't win fights by decision. That's certainly not to say that he can't, go ahead and steamroll through, but predominantly he is a first round fighter. He's a very fast starter, a very front foot forward fighter. Jesus, that was hard to say.
That's difficult.
What I felt in this fight, however, is though he was just trying to be a more technical fighter than he ever has been. He was attempting to out footwork Nicolau. He was attempting to pressure Nicolau. He was attempting to bait Nicolau with his footworks, with his feints, with his range management, with his cage cutting. He was trying to bait Nicolau into throwing shots that Schnell could counter. And by doing so, he got countered himself by a better counter fighter.
Right.
It felt like and feels like what we are seeing in this performance is potentially Matt Schnell 2.0. And unfortunately, he's trying to fight like Nicolau, but Nicolau just does it better because that's his primary style.
Right.
I don't think we should necessarily write Matt Schnell off here, but the massive red flag that I had here was that the damage that Schnell has taken in previous fights is now very telling when he gets hit. I don't think that the left hand that dropped him in the first round, and for a moment he looked like he was stiff as a board going down. And it wasn't until he hit the canvas that I think he woke up a little and then started to do some fighting thing. But there was a moment there where that left hand came over the top and it didn't look hellacious. It looked like a solid left hand, certainly impactful striking.
But shouldn't be the left hand that puts you down and puts you out necessarily, unless it's because you're 32 and your nickname is Danger. And last time we saw you compete, you zombie walked through a whole bunch of elbows that would have put a mere mortal down.
Right. The last note that I write about the finish here is that Matt Schnell walks forward with his left hand jousting, a marauding left hand. He steps way too far in without seeing what's coming back. He looks for a big left hook, but he gets caught with a big right hand that clubs him to the ground. Gets taken back, mount, and pounds him out. His inability to take a shot here is a big problem. Maybe he can continue to change his style and just get hit a little bit less. But his inability to get hit doesn't look great here. And that, to me, the leaning in, the marauding left hand, that marauding left hand is a big red flag when you're closing distance the way that he did. You see Stylebender use it really well, where he marauds that left hand and then takes a grip of the right hand of his opponent. That means he knows that a right hook isn't coming because they have to break that grip. Just marauding in and then closing the distance means a big right hand is coming every single time. When Nicolau throws it, your left hand is absolutely in no man's land. There's no way it's coming back to defend you. If it's coming quick, like it does at the lighter weight classes, the likelihood of you going to be able to roll out of the way of it or roll with it or even duck under it is limited. These are just, it just feels like this is a guy that's trying a new style, and is it just like in sparring when you're trying new things, you're going to get caught. It just so happens he tried it and got caught under the big lights with a real shot. And yeah, I don't know.
I do appreciate, again, as I mentioned with RDA, using his time on the mic wisely. I think Nicolau used his time on the mic wisely, recognized that he needed a stoppage like that he needed a performance like that to sort of elevate him. He is somebody that is 7-1 in the UFC between 2 stints. He has won 4 straight since coming back. Now gets that top 10 stoppage win. Feels like somebody that is just perpetually a step outside of the title conversation. I hope that changes, because he looks like the real deal. He looks like a guy that should be a part of that conversation, or at least tested against those guys. Like you do I'm not sure. I at least want to see the test of it, because he's proven now that he can beat those guys that are behind him. So get him in there with Pantoja. Get him in there with Kai Kara-France. Get him in there with, I think he beats Alex Perez, who I think is sort of holding on to some residual positives from years ago. Get him in there with some of those guys. Get him in there with Davison Figueiredo, Brandon Moreno, whoever loses that fight. And let's just see, because he might be the real deal. And he's 28 and he's won 4 straight and he's 7-1 in the UFC. And we need to see guys like that. This is our constant argument. We need to see fighters like that tested to the top level of their abilities, so that we can figure out where they truly fit, and then give them the chance to maybe grow and develop and learn from that setback if it comes.
Couldn't agree more.
We move forward into the heavyweight division. Sergey Pavlovich, just absolutely, yeah. So I came into the week asking, why is Tai Tuivasa the underdog? Picking Tai Tuivasa, putting out wagers on Tai Tuivasa, and good goddamn Lord was I wrong, because Sergey Pavlovich knocked him down with a jab. And then just, heavyweights tend to, in those finishing sequences, and I think we saw heavyweight from Tai, right? Oh shit, I'm hurt. I'm gonna just start swinging crazy. Normally, that's how we see heavyweights try to finish at times too. That's how Tai tries to finish. It's how Derek Lewis tries to finish. Sergey Pavlovich was like, nah, son, I'm not doing that. You're going to throw this and I'm going to get out of the way and whap. And then you're going to throw another one and you're going to come up and I'm going to, and then you're going to do that and I'm going to, and it was 54 seconds, 5 straight victories, all in the first round, all by complete drubbing. Get this man in there with one of these 3 or 4 guys at the top of this division, and let's figure some shit out.
Yeah, so, I mean, Pavlovich was my spotlight this week. It was either going to be himself, RDA, or Dolidze. But I just thought that this is a man that has a lot of steam behind him. And even though, and I wrote this in my spotlight, is that even though he was ranked number 6, I don't think many people knew who Pavlovich was, right? Not a big talker. He's not been featured on massive pay-per-views. There's not a ton of media around him, but there is with Tai Tuivasa, right? And when he goes in and just demolishes Tai in the way that he does, before he got hit, he'd landed 6 clubbing blows on Tuivasa, and Tuivasa comes back with this short elbow. Pavlovich steps back, says, okay, no problem, and then just sends him to the shadow realm, right? And I wrote in my spotlight that one of the things that was really impressive was his ability in the chaos. And remember, the chaos is where Tai Tuivasa thrives, right? This is where he wants to be. Some of the most clinical finishes we've seen and devastating finishes we've seen from Tai Tuivasa is he gets hurt and the guy overcommits to the finish, and Ty's like, lol, eat this right hand. And Pavlovich just didn't allow any of it. We talk all the time about fighters wasting finishing opportunities, not just at heavyweight, but at all the weights, right? They hurt somebody, they're balled up against the fence, and they don't pick the right shots. I think one of the best people at picking shots is somebody like Dustin Poirier, right? Who will pepper you with shots, 60% shots, 40% shots, and then land a big shot. And Pavlovich, even at 40%, is going to be a horrendously powerful shot.
Right.
But in that closing sequence, he just peppers Tuivasa with 2 hooks. Tuivasa begins to sit into the cage to try and roll underneath. Pavlovich takes a slight step back, lands his uppercut, and we're done here. I had no need for the coffin nails, by the way.
Agreed.
No need whatsoever. I have no understanding why we needed them. But I get it. Fine. There was only 2 or 3. I understand it's not egregious, but I mean, that fight was a dunzo, right?
Yeah.
But to your point, I mean, Tai Tuivasa dropped himself by swinging that right-hand jackhammer so hard. And that, to me, just tells you the level of chaos that's in his brain at that time, right? So scrambled, so unable to deal with the pressure, so unaware of what's actually happening around him.
Well, and it just throws you back to base instinct, right? Base instinct is brawl. Base instinct is just keep swinging, because if you hit somebody, then this that's coming my way is done. Base instinct isn't let me reset and get out and circle out and try to find space and clear my head. It's throwback. One of the things we talked about on the preview show going into this fight was the question of whether Tai Tuivasa was returning too quickly after being in a competitive, spirited fight with Ciryl Gane in Paris at the start of September, where ultimately he was finished in the 3rd round. There's no way to ever say definitively going into or necessarily coming out of, right? So I want to put the caveat on this of what we've already just said. Sergey Pavlovich is a gigantic human being, and even on all of the rest and a big long camp, and you haven't taken any punishment, when he hits you, it is going to be devastating. That being said, you now have to wonder, or further wonder, I guess, whether this was too quick for Tai Tuivasa to be coming back, because that's now 2 knockout losses in 3 months for a guy that part of what made him dangerous and part of what allowed him this climb was that he could take some of these shots. And now he's not taking these shots nearly as well.
So I posed the same question to Graham on the big podcast, and his opinion was that it's very hard to tell. He knows and has known fighters to jump in quicker than 3 months and be fine. As he rightfully said, this isn't Bisping Kelvin Gastelum,
right?
Where it's, 3 weeks notice or whatever mindless, crazy batshit stuff that was. But I mean, I do think that there are legitimate questions to be raised, and what it feels like 3 months is too short. Now, we can't govern a sport on feelings, right? We have to govern a sport on data,
right?
And we don't have the data. We do not have a clinical. We don't have a clinical method.
Agreed.
Yet to say a concussion equals this amount of time off.
My face was because we should be working towards some of these things. And even if it's not from a medical data standpoint of this happened, so it equals this much time off, we should just be operating from he got knocked the fuck out in September. Maybe not having him back at the start of December would be let's push that to February. Let's push that to March. Just to give him, and I get that they need to get Pavlovich in there and they want to get this guy in. Like at the time that this fight was announced, I said this is, and we talked about it, perfect matchmaking. UFC wins no matter what. Either Tai is right back into the win column and hustles forward, or as you said, Pavlovich gets the bump from beating Tai Tuivasa. But we need to start doing okay, this is what happened and acting accordingly.
Agree. I I think that obviously we have medical suspensions, right? And they are there, but they feel more like, one, arbitrary figures, and two, they're not adhered to, right? If you tell a fighter, oh, you're not allowed contact for 6 months, and then you wave him out of your doctor's office, and there's absolutely
He's
no,
going to the gym.
he's going to the gym 2 days later after he's had his fucking Chinese takeaway and he's filled his boots with beer. He's going to the gym 2 days later because he's bored out of his fucking mind and he doesn't know what else to do with his life. And when he's there, he's like, I'm just going to watch practice because I'm a bit banged up. And then there's an odd partner and he's like, oh, no, I'll just jump in for the drills. And then the next minute, you know, he's fucking gloves on, gum shield in, doing things 3 days out from a fight. Like, that's obviously hyperbole, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. It fits to something we talked about on a speakers of putting more things in the way of these athletes. We talked about it from a retirement standpoint, but just an overall governance and overall better regulation and better adherence to the things that are supposed to be put in place to protect these men and women from themselves and from those competitive desires and urges. And hopefully someone talks to Ty after this one and says, look, big man, we're going to take 6 months. You're going to go home. You're going to do the holidays at home. You're going to stay there until March. And then we can start talking about what the next step is and what the regroup is, because he doesn't need to fight again, to me, until at least the summer. We move to the middleweight division. Roman Dolidze makes the absolute most of a short notice opportunity. This was precisely why you take this fight if you are Roman Dolidze. Goes out in the second round. It's a TKO win. Understandably, it's a TKO win. Throws a bunch of punches from back mount over Jack Hermansson. Should move him into the top 10. Third straight stoppage win. Fourth straight victory overall. But it's a TKO win because this motherfucker got a calf slicer lockdown on Jack Hermansson in the second round. And before we get to that, and before I just clear out and let you go, on comms, I don't know if you listened to it during the broadcast, I tweeted it out during the fight. This is why, and look, I'm going to sound like an asshole. It's fine. This is why you got to do research, people, because there was this moment in that fight where Dolidze is doing extremely well on the ground, and the comms are like, man, look at how well he's... If you don't know that that dude began his martial arts journey as a grappler and as a very high level European grappler, winning ADCC trials, doing all of the things on the canvases before making this move to MMA, then you haven't done your homework and you haven't prepared. And I don't say that for necessarily fans, but if you are an analyst, whether in my capacity, your capacity, or above, you got to know these things. It's like the Mark Jacasey pulling out the wrestling. You got to know these things, because that wasn't surprising to me. And if I know it, I want everybody to know it. And then he goes and locks up a calf slicer, which looked like was maybe going to get the finish anyways, and then turned that into I'm just going to pin you here and beat the hell out of you. You were blowing the kisses. You were giving the chef kisses. I will clear out and let you just enjoy this.
So I said going into this that this was maybe my favorite fight on the card. And it was maybe my favorite fight on the card because I was very interested in two things. On the feet, and it kind of played out not how I expected it to at all, actually. I think it's very hard to call a calf slicer into back mount finish. But what I was very interested in is that Hermansson is somebody that's very active on the feet, moves a lot, throws a lot, and Dolidze is the opposite, right? It certainly looks for straighter shots, looks for more impactful shots, looks to try and walk people down. He's very methodical. He's a very ploddy fighter. Again, not disrespectful. He likes to sit staunch in his stance and land big power. And that's always an interesting dichotomy, right? Especially with the scoring criteria, how it is these days. And then I also was interested in the grappling stuff. How does it look? How does it look with Jack Hermansson being, on paper, maybe the better takedown artist, but as an overarching grappler, I think Delitzé probably has the advantages. I also really enjoy the active guard of Delitzé, both from he likes that left-hand post against the fence, against the sort of side of the head face, and then some not 12-6 elbows. And then he has active opportunities to do things, right? To look for submission opportunities, to look for sweeps. He hits the fucking flower sweep in MMA lab. What the fuck are we talking about? Like, what the fuck are we talking about? I mean, it pained me a little because I actually think that even Delitzé didn't think he was going to actually hit it. Because when he hits the flower sweep and Hermansson rocks over, generally what should happen there is the free leg, the pendulum leg of Delitzé, pendulums down really, really, really hard, and then he tucks it underneath himself and gets them out, right? That's generally what should happen. As he's about to tuck that leg over, he hesitates for a second. And I think that's oh, fuck, I just hit a flower sweep.
Right.
And
this thing that I was trying to do worked, and fuck, now I'm just a little bit.
Right. Like, I think what Delitzé expected was a severe off balance, and then he would have been able to scramble to his feet or, moved on to whatever it was. I don't think he expected it to work with the beauty that it worked in. Right. Anyway, he wasn't able to consolidate mount because he hesitated for a second. Jack Hermansson exploded up, got to a back body lock, and, we were where we were. The second round, we saw exactly the same thing. Now, the whole finishing sequence is a very technical one. He goes from that flower sweep setup, but this time Hermansson tries to base on his left arm. That gives Delitzé an ability to go for a straight armbar, right? Or a shotgun armbar is what it's called. That doesn't work, so he starts to look for K-guard. K-guard fails. Jack Hermansson does a very good job of defending the K-guard. Delitzé goes double outside, which in MMA is not advisable at all. Now, this is where it gets fun, right? So generally, when you're in double outside, you're looking to reap your opponent, right? Or you're looking to go 50-50 on your opponent. Delitzé ends up in 50-50 as Jack Hermansson's starting to try to strip the grips. What Hermansson's going to try to do from that position is turn the corner, like try to get his knee to the ground and turn the corner and end up in side control or maybe in a front headlock situation with Delitzé. Delitzé knows this is happening, obviously. And instead of either underhooking the secondary leg so he can't turn or keeping him in 50-50 or whatever it is, he just takes his left leg out and laces it across the back knee. This is actually something that I do too, right? It doesn't often end up in the situation that we have back mount in. I generally find that people drop to a knee, they begin to wrestle up, and you can finish calf slices and stuff from there. But that lacing of the inside leg, when he was doing it, I was like, I know what this motherfucker's going for. Now, Hermansson noticed early that there was a calf slicer happening and did the right things, right? Tried to bail, tried to make sure that his weight was on the right-hand side so he was going to be able to have leverage in his leg. But Delitzé did a great job. He followed him up to dogfight and got a far side underhook. Now, the reason that was good was because Jack Hermansson had his whizzer, but wasn't able to base on this side because that would put pressure on the calf slicer. That allowed Delitzé to pull Jack Hermansson back on top of him. At this point, Jack's kind of fucked because he doesn't have good base anywhere. Delitzé's already got the triangle of the calf slicer. Delitzé turns in towards the side, doesn't have base. Now we're in back mount. Now we can do finishes. But to have the cerebral capacity, I suppose, to be like, fuck it, I'm just going to try this thing is brilliant, for one. I really enjoyed the application. I don't think Hermansson was going to tap to the calf slicer, frankly. I think a calf slicer is one of those things where it's a lot of pain, but takes a lot to break somebody. And so I think that, especially from that type of position, if you're going to really do damage to the back of the knee, you want to have an ability to pull on the toes and equally kick your leg that's in the back of the knee to like try to really extend those ligaments. Whereas obviously a lot of it is just Delitzé hipping down into the foot and not being able necessarily to really extend his leg away with the same ferocity. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't painful. I'm sure it fucking sucked in there, but I think he made the right decisions. He made the right decisions to have back mount. Jack wasn't going to be able to move his hips very hard. He wasn't going to be able to explode from that position, and he just pounded him out, and it was fucking beautiful. Really, really nice stuff.
This was exactly why you take this fight if you're Roman Delitzé. This was perfect. Now, a lot of things had to work in his favor. He normally, as I said on the broadcast, goes back to Georgia when he's when he's through his fight. So he beat Phil Haas a couple weeks ago, but he stuck around to work with Sergey Spivak, who was supposed to fight 2 weeks ago. And in that time, this opportunity came up and he was like, yep, right here. Because if I win, great. I'm in the top 10 and it's 3 straight finishes this year and 4 straight wins overall. Away we go. And if I lose, well, I took a short notice fight and lost to Jack Hermanson. No big deal. We reset for next year and I still did good things this year. This was perfect. He is now going to be, and look, Sean's going to laugh, of course, somewhere. Sean Sheehan is laughing at my saying he is now going to be a top 10 middleweight because that doesn't mean all that much. But he's now going to be a top 10 middleweight. And he looks really interesting right now. He looks like he has settled into being in the UFC. He's settled into being a middleweight and to using the full complement of his skills. And he is very interesting to me going into next year. We stick around the middleweight division. Eric Anders gets a second round TKO win over Kyle Dawkins. I don't want to spend too much time on this. The only real takeaway I have is I don't think Kyle Dawkins can compete at this level anymore. I think the damage he has taken, the way he reacted to those shots, and as always, right? Eric Anders is a gigantic human being that has fought at light heavyweight. He is a very good athlete. He is a very strong man. The way Kyle Dawkins reacted when he was hit doesn't feel good to me. It didn't look good to me. I'm somebody that has talked to Kyle a number of times, talked to him before this fight, asked him at great length about the reconstructive surgery and the concerns and the damage and all of those things. And the first shot he took, I was like, shit. This is the thing I was worried about, and I'm not even his family. And so I just don't know. Like, this might be, you need to take a year and just let the body heal, figure out whether this is where you want to be, because it doesn't, like, this is going to happen. Dudes are going to punch you in the face. They're all going to be big and strong like Eric Anders. And when the reactions are the way they were on Saturday, I don't know if that's something Kyle Dawkins should be doing in the next 9 months or at this level at all, quite frankly.
So I don't really have an opinion on that. What I will give an opinion on is when I watch Kyle Dawkins fight, outside of the taking shots, I like what I see for the most part. I don't think he has enough power to back up the style that he has. To me, this fight was just one person impactful striking and the other person not, you know? If we look at this from a judging perspective, okay, the fight didn't need to go to the judges, right? But Eric Anders landed far less.
Right.
But with
the impact is massive. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, Eric Anders is somebody that's very hot and cold. Sometimes he looks great. Sometimes he looks awful. Sometimes he can't stop a takedown to save his life. Sometimes he does what he did against Dawkins and just looked like he had iron hips. And I think this was a fine matchup going in. It was an interesting matchup going in, a compelling matchup going in. And Anders just had a great night and Dawkins didn't. And maybe there is something to say, as you said, about taking a year off, allowing the body to heal, maybe take yourself out of the USADA testing pool and live a regular life for a year, you know, and just.
I also wonder if it's just one of those instances, and we've seen it throughout history of this sport, right? Some guys just aren't meant to be at this level. Their style doesn't carry over. Their style doesn't work in the division that they're in at this level. Kyle Dawkins might just have to be the CFFC middleweight champ for the rest of his life. That may be where he sort of tops out and fits best. It's certainly not what he wants in terms of the goals and aspirations for his own career, but that just might be the best course of action, because the way this played out is how a bunch of these are going to play out, right? This is 2 in a row now where he's just been, you know, smashed by a bigger human being.
Let's talk about Dan Henderson Jr. Shaved head, double knee sleeves, Nico Price.
So Phil Rowe defeats Dan Henderson Jr., Nico Price. 3rd round, TKO stoppage. After being on the brink of being finished himself, kind of gathers his wits. Nico Price has absolutely spent all of his energy in the third round and is like, oh, fuck, I don't have anything left. And Phil Rowe is like, cool. Here, have some of this. I went into this fight doing I'm not sure what to make of Phil Rowe. I hadn't really fully decided because the guys he beat weren't super impressive prior to this. He went out and he did things and he got the wins that he needed to get. And I came away from this feeling like I still am not 100% sure. What were your thoughts in watching this and breaking this down?
I mean, it's just one person straight hitting and the other person not. That's really what this fight was to me. I think Phil Rowe was tired. There were spots in that third round where Phil Rowe looked like he was fading away a little bit too. But Nico Price is just not technical, right? Just isn't technical and doesn't do the fighting very well. I don't mean that that comes across very disrespectful and whatever. But
I know what you mean, though. He is a guy that it needs to be chaos. Where he thrives and where he's had his success is when he can draw you into a brawl. But when you go out there and fight him technically and force him to be technical, you can beat him every day because he can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not every day, but maybe 6 out of 7 days. Because there were moments in that fight where Rowe wasn't able to sustain the footwork and the head movement and the straight hitting, and Price sort of grew into it a little bit. And there were moments, as I said, in that third round when Rowe looked like he was fading a bit. He got dropped, and Price is doing some good ground and pound stuff, and everything. Things were happening, but always I will bank on the more technical fighter just finding a way. And whereas Price will land big sort of hammer fists over the top, or he'll try and throw weird, awkward hooks when he's off balance and his core's not set, and just all of this sort of stuff. Phil Rowe just plugs away with straight shots and eventually gets him out of there. And it wasn't a great fight to watch. It wasn't a great example of MMA. And for Nico Price, it feels to me there are a number of fighters, Clay Guida, one of them, Scott Holtzman, another, Price here also, and there's another couple that have been on this card that they're sort of the mid-generation of MMA. They're not the new school where it's all technical. It's all, Clay Guida's the old generation, but has managed to, skip fucking school. He's not graduated and he stayed into the second generation. But it's the guys that have learned from what they were brought up with, which were the Dan Henderson type era, right? And they were this is a lifestyle, this isn't a sport. I think another good example, and we'll get to her, is Angela Hill. Angela Hill sort of been through that second generation, but decided to graduate to the new generation. And you can see what really good coaching has done for Angela Hill, where she started to see it more as a sport, more as a technical endeavor over just it being a lifestyle. And we'll get to that, whatever. But Phil Rowe is an example of being sort of the upper class of the last generation and the lower class of the new generation, where he realizes that technique beats most things when your athleticism isn't extremely, extremely different. And yeah, this is the MMA world we're living in.
I mean, let's get to Angela Hill. She goes out, she collects a unanimous decision win over Emily Ducote, 30-27s across the board. It was, as I put it on Saturday, to my estimation, her best performance of her career. She looked fantastic, and fantastic from, as you like to say, second one. Came out and said, I'm going to put this on you, and you're going to have to deal with being second, going second, or figuring out a way to be able to go first. And Emily Ducote just couldn't, because Angela Hill was in her face the whole damn time. She was mixing up her techniques. She was mixing her levels. It was beautiful. It was a great performance. And to me, felt like, one, what you're saying of proof of evolution, proof of development, but also a little bit of a reminder for people that look at Angela Hill's record and go, well, she's only 10-12 in the UFC. And it's not, she's better than that number.
Maybe.
I think she is, as they mentioned on the show, as we've talked about in the past. There's a couple split decisions in there that are janky. There's some close fights against very good competition that if they go the other way, or if you actually look at who she's lost to, it's mostly good talent. And I won't fault somebody for losing to people that are constantly fighting people that are better than them and losing. Okay. She's now found her kind of perfect, to me, ideal resting spot in this division and looked great on Saturday.
I think, and maybe Angela can say different, I feel like the influence of Justin Flores has actually changed Amanda, who the fuck is Amanda Hill? Angela Hill's game drastically, because it's that intermediary transition between takedowns and where she wants to be, which is striking, or at least in the clinches, right? I think that her plum clinch looked insane. She was destroying Emily Ducote in the plum clinch. The amount of knees that were thrown, the elbows that were thrown, she was ragdolling her around. And I feel like, Justin Flores is somebody that has helped transition judo into MMA. And certainly some of that base, some of that upward posture, some of that ability to move opponents and off-balance opponents will have translated directly into the Muay Thai clinch. But outside of the clinch, she just looked like she was striking impactfully all of the time. The teeps up the middle, a lot of leg kicks. She wasn't throwing at air. When she was immediately jumping into the pocket and landing well. Like, just overall, a really, really, really good performance. And I think even to the last bell, with the last 8 seconds, Ducote tries to jump on a takedown. It doesn't matter. Angela Hill's defending well, landing shots to the very last second when the referee stops it. Just out and out, pillar to post, a really, really solid performance from Angela Hill. And like you say, I'm never gonna argue for a fighter doing fighting things against people that are better than them. It is what it is. I think Ducote will come again, right? Agreed. She will learn from the experience. I think that Angela Hill showed her what it's like to be the nail a little in the UFC. And Ducote certainly was in that fight, right? She touched Angela Hill a hell of a lot. I just think the impactful striking leaned far more on the side of Angela Hill. But yeah, good performance.
There are times you just have to learn about things like the volume and things like the output. We're seeing that more and more, right? There's more instances every week where we go, oh, this person needs to just understand, I can't go out there and throw 1 or 2. I need to throw 3, and I can't have these 20-second, 30-second stretches where I'm not throwing. And that just comes with experience and timing and education, really. And I think that fight was an education for Emily Ducote, who I agree will be back at some point. But a great performance for Overkill Hill. Clay Guida goes out and gets a split decision win over Scott Holtzman. We're just moving forward. That's it. Nothing. Clay Guida does Clay Guida things. Scott Holtzman retires. All the best to you, Hot Sauce.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's very impressive that Clay Guida, with his style, is still managing to rack up wins in the UFC. And what I mean by that is I'm not disrespecting his style at all, but in the old scoring system, he clean sweeps loads of fights with just the aggressive takedowns, the top control, bits of damage, whatever. But not a lot of Clay Guida's game is built around impactful striking. The man's 68 years of age. Like, there's not a lot of impactfulness left in his muscles. So for him to build a game around impactful striking is, I'm not saying anything. If anything, I'm heaping praise on being able to win fights. Scott Holtzman's always been a dangerous guy. It wasn't a fantastic fight. Fair play to Scott Holtzman. Thanks very much for everything you've given the UFC and MMA. But I mean, I don't think there's a ton to say. It's just astounding to me that Clay Guida can continue to go out there and can continue to get wins.
Officially, Clayton Charles Guida turns 41 on December 8th.
Plus 27 years.
So you labeling him 68 years old when he is 3 years younger than your boy right here kind of hurts a little bit. Just saying. Michael Johnson goes out and gets a unanimous decision win over Mark Jacasey in a fight where, I'm just clearing out. I'm just here. This is a guy you're super familiar with. You close relationship with some of his coaches. This certainly did not look like the performance you or I, or frankly anyone was expecting for Mark Jacasey. What do you feel went wrong?
Everything.
Fair. Yep. Grand.
No, I mean, that's obviously very harsh. I just think that this was a MMA fighter in Michael Johnson who's experienced, knows how to win fights, knows how to manage a 3-round fight, knows how to manage a guy that is not bringing his full arsenal to the table, and Johnson just does enough to win the fight 30-27. I know it wasn't 30-27 across the board. It should have been 29-28. I thought Diakese did enough to win the first round, but
Agreed.
one judge scored it 30-27. For me, if I'm Mark Diakese or Jacasey, whatever it is, and you possess the level of athleticism and you possess the level of ability to move your body the way that Mark Jacasey does, if I'm your coach, I am forcing you to abandon that for a couple of years and focus purely on taking 60% off every single shot that you throw, throwing with volume, working on your footwork, and then we'll add all the athletic stuff back in.
Right.
Because in this fight, everything was a 1. Everything was a 1 or a 2. And if it wasn't a 2, it was something flashy on the 2. It was a flying knee to open up. It was a turning side kick. It was a this. It was a jumping. It was a spinning. It was a whatever. The fucking low turning calf kick, and Johnson's like, lol, just steps to his left and takes a back body lock. Like, what the fuck are we doing? Like, what are we doing? This is mindless decision making again from Jacasey. This is a man that possesses some of the freakiest athleticism that we have ever seen inside the octagon. And for some reason, and I don't know what it is, he cannot seem to put it all together. The takedown stuff, okay, the first couple failed. We know that Michael Johnson's a good wrestler. We know that he's able to stop takedowns. But does that mean that you just he threw 2 takedowns?
Abandoned them, yeah.
Fight. 2 takedowns. The first one didn't work. Grand, no problem. Second one, got a little closer, didn't work. And he's like, fine, I guess I just throw spinning side kicks for 3 rounds. Like, it's fucking stupidity. And this comes from a place of the reason why I'm this as emotional as I am about it is because we have seen Jacasey do amazing things inside that octagon. Forget the Timu Pacquiao knockout. I don't care.
Right.
Talk about the Joseph Duffy domination. Talk about what's your man's name that he fought last time? The Demir
Hadzovic.
Right. Incredible performance. You go out and who's the guy who fought before that? Slava Borchev. Like, he negates somebody like Slava Borchev who had all the hype coming in and just destroys him grappling. Does enough on the feet to get to the grappling. Hadzovic does the same thing. Just okay, this is Michael Johnson, a very, very, very different prospect. I understand. But why are we just falling immediately back to the flashy 1s, flashy 2s, explosions into things when you've just shown me 2 fights in a row that you're able to be measured and controlled and patient and technical and apply a game plan to a very, very, very high level? What are we doing? Why is that duality there? I don't understand why it exists.
I don't think we're ever going to get an answer. And I know you're not asking that because you expect there to be an answer. I would love to get an answer. I noticed throughout the fight that Mark Jacasey's right ankle / foot looked super janky. He has a giant protruding. Are you going to tell me that that's actually the way it always is? Or I have
no idea. I actually noticed a pull in the left knee.
Oh, interesting.
So in the first round, Jacasey throws a something. Can't quite remember what he throws, but Johnson comes back with like a 1-2, and as Jacasey is trying to back away from the shots, he sort of backs away into the cage, and on the turn, something weird happens with his left knee. And you know when fighters like hop on whatever foot the other foot is hurt, right? He like hopped up on his left knee, had a quick look at it, like shook it about in the air a little bit, and then carried on as if nothing had happened. And I mean, I don't know whether he wears double knee sleeves all the time, but certainly I noticed the right leg. I noticed the left leg during the mid-fight. Like, maybe there was something wrong coming into this. Maybe that played into the way his performance was. I've no idea. But yeah.
It's a good win for Michael Johnson. It's a frustrating performance for Mark Jacasey.
Agreed.
Move to the featherweight division. Jonathan Pierce goes out and gets his 5th straight victory since moving to 145 pounds, beating the ever-loving hell out of Darren Elkins, a fight you watched before we jumped on here. I mean,
can we just not book Darren Elkins for fights anymore?
Yep.
Can we just not do it?
Yep.
Because this is Frankie Edgar with a chin. That's what we're looking at here. And
yeah.
again, like, think of, this is the thing that gets me a little bit, actually, is that because we see the visceral finishes of Frankie Edgar, we attribute sympathy to that fight. Because we're like, oh, fuck. Frankie's gone out there. He's never been finished before. Now he's finished 11 times in a row, 4 times in a row, whatever it is. Darren Elkins is so tough that he doesn't get brutally, unconsciously separated into the shadow realm. But the amount of punishment that this guy is taking, and these fights are not competitive. They're not competitive. He is a walking, non-technical, very good wrestling punch bag. We should not be attributing fights to Darren Elkins anymore. This goes past entertainment. Like I've said before, entertainment is Arman Saryukin versus Matoya Shimura. Entertainment is, I don't know, pick another fucking great fight.
You can have bloody battles. You can have bloody wars, right? Like, we've seen them. But I was very impressed with comms in this. I believe it was Michael Bisping who said, like, look, we sit here and we applaud Darren Elkins for his toughness, for his grit, for his resolve, for these comebacks. But the only way we get to those points is that this guy takes, as his nickname is, a whole fuck ton of damage. And at some point, we have to acknowledge and say, enough is enough. This felt like one of those fights during the fight where there should have been a no mas moment where his corner or the referee or somebody needs to stop in and just be like, nope, we're not doing it anymore. I actually thought after Cub Swanson knocked him out in the first round, that would have been the like, hey, this is the trigger, right? This is the red flag that is the one of these things is not like the other, because Darren Elkins hasn't been the guy that gets knocked out in the first round. And now he's getting clipped with his spinning heel kick and he's out in the first round. And that should be the warning sign. Instead, he rebooks. And look, Dan Stupp, who is going to be on a conversation with this week, mentioned it in his sort of putting out. He and I were on a betting show on Thursday night. I threw out the prop, as I did on my program here, picks and plays, of Darren Elkins in the third round. Just huge number. We've seen Darren Elkins do it. He followed suit, same thing. We talked about it together on the show, and we, messaging back and forth during the fight. The thing that feels gross, actually, making that pick, because what it means Darren Elkins is going to have to go through to get there. Actually, and I think I'm actually going to start taking this stance a little bit of I'm just out on some of this stuff, because I don't actually want to win on Darren Elkins coming back from a hellacious beating and doing Darren Elkins things. I want Darren Elkins to go home now and not come back.
Yeah. Like, we say, oh, well, if we bet on Darren Elkins in the third round, we know what that means. No, we don't. We don't know what it means to be in there for 14 minutes and just get royally fucking destroyed. We don't know. Very, very few of us know what that is and what that feels like. And for us to be putting money on a man going in and winning fights, quote unquote, in that method, it feels disgusting to me.
Yeah. There's some reckonings going on in my head coming out of Saturday. It's one of those things that, like, I understand. I enjoy the wagering side of this sport. I enjoy the wagering side of all sports. I've grown up as a gambler and enjoy gambling. But you have to make some separations. You have to make some, and I'm all for if you don't. I'm all for if you say, nope, not for me. It's tough. And the other tough part of this is that we come away from it and, you know, understandably, we're talking about Darren Elkins and the damage that he has taken, and not Jonathan Pierce, who did all the things that he is expected to do. Just did his job and said afterwards, like, he was throwing up in the corner at the end of the fight from all of Darren Elkins's blood seeping into his mouth. Maybe we don't get to that point. Referees, doctors, whoever. And like Dan Murgliata on Saturday seemed to just be he seemed to just be there for shits and giggles, right? He seemed to just be there. Like when he stopped the fight to look at the cut, started it with, "Hey man, I know you're tough." And kind of at the start of the third round was like, "Oh, are you good?" And Darren Elkins is like, "Yeah, fuck man, I'm good." Somebody needs to stop that. Somebody needs to be like, "We know you can come out and do it, but you don't need to. You
Hey
shouldn't have
man,
to."
I know you're tough should be banned from the lexicon of MMA refereeing or MMA judging. Toughness is fine, but this isn't toughness, right?
No.
Because, you know, Shawnee talks about this, right? And I agree with him that when all skills are equal and all athleticism is equal, it is going to be fighters who are tougher than the other person that's going to win fights, right? Because it's going to be, if two guys are just landing equal damage on each other, the person that can take the damage better is going to win fights. Agree. But when your primary weapon is toughness, we're not talking about equal fighting here. We are talking about allowing, sanctioning, booking a compromised fighter to go in and compete for our entertainment. No, dude.
Agreed. Move to lightweight. Natan Levy gets a unanimous decision win over Gennaro Valdez. Honestly, this is one that we're not going to spend a lot of time on. Natan Levy is the more complete fighter, is the better all-around fighter, but also still not somebody for me that I look at and go, this guy's moving forward in the division. There's a bright future ahead. He will continue to compete at this level in this range. Great. I do think, and I will write about this somewhere in the future, that we need to have a bit of a conversation about some of these Contender Series graduates, because Gennaro Valdez is another one of these guys that won a contract last year or earned a contract last year, has rolled into the UFC, is now 0-2, doesn't look like he can hang at this level. And so what are we doing? And we all have various thoughts on what that answer is, or various answers to that question. And I do think there are a myriad of them, but it's something that deserves a larger conversation going forward at some point. We shift to featherweight. Francis Marshall gets a second round knockout win over Marcelo Rojo. It is a clean right hand in the pocket. We questioned going into this whether a fight with Rojo was too much too soon for the 23-year-old protege of Kurt Pellegrino. Francis Marshall came out and showed us and told us, "Nah, man, I'm good. I'm all right. I'm good here." He took the first round, it felt like, to just sort of deal with being out there. And again, I think Combs did a pretty good job this week. They talked about, look, it's really different fighting in the Apex, earning your contract, or fighting wherever you fought beforehand and there's 8,000-10,000 people, maybe, like probably not even that, probably more like 3 to 5, and 400 of them are your friends and family and coworkers and guys you went to high school with and whatever. And then walking out at the Amway Center and it's 14,000 and they're hammered up and hungry to see this because we haven't seen a fight card here in 4 years. And so it felt like the first round was just like, all right, let me be out here. And this is a grown man trying to punch me in the face, and it's an angry Argentinian trying to knock me into next week. Let me get settled. And then he came out in the second and was like, cool, I belong here. Have a right hand. Pretty good finish.
Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff.
All you can ask for from a 23-year-old that's 7 fights in.
Damn right. You come in and look, this is valuable experience. This is exactly what you're needing and wanting. And let's take the slow roll with him at 23, 7 fights in, right? Let's relax. Let's not fucking set the wolves.
That was going to be my next point, and I think it's what I wrote in my takeaways from Saturday. This is a lovely performance. Hammer on the brakes, guys. He's 23. Marcelo Rojo doesn't have a win in the UFC. He's now 0-3. He's been finished every time out. Let's not make this more than it is. It is a lovely debut. It is a great win for a 23-year-old kid. As I say to my dog all the time, calm down, buddy. Calm down, buddy. It's okay. We can just go slow. We're allowed. We're allowed. We don't have to rush him into the thick of things and suddenly start projecting how far he's one fight in. Let's just go easy with it. We open the night at the strawweight. Yasmin Haragui gets a second round stoppage win over Estela Nunes. This was another good performance from Haragui, who I tend to really like. I'm starting to get behind her as somebody I want to pay some close attention to in this division. She got dropped out of the gate. She threw a naked kick, and Estela Nunes was like, I make people pay for naked kicks, and punched her right in the face and dropped her. And Haragui got up and was like, cool, can't do that anymore. And you saw her make the adjustments throughout the rest of the round. It was one of those rounds, if you go back and watch it, where the greatest impact is obviously the blow that puts her on the ground. And so it is what it is. But the rest of that round, she's clawing back and she's having success. And she's finding the shots that ultimately lead to the finish in the second round. Those are things to me, when I see young fighters, that I go, okay, those are differentiation points to me. Those are the things that separate good from great. I'm not saying she's going to be great. I'm not saying she's going to be a champion. All I'm saying for right now is she's 2-0 in the UFC. She is undefeated overall. She is in her early 20s, and I'm very interested to see more.
I echo every single statement. 2-0 in the UFC. Let's fucking see it. And again, another one. Slow the roll. Let's just see how this plays out.
Doesn't have to be suddenly in there with Mackenzie Dern. Doesn't have to be suddenly in there with Angela Hill. She doesn't need to fight Emily Ducote next. It's just slow matriculation up who beat Sam Hughes last time out. Whoever beat Sam Hughes last time out is who Yasmin Haragui should be fighting. I can't remember who it was, but it was one of those fights where it was like, great, here we go. Away you go. That's what it should be. Just stay in this range. Strawweight's good. We've got lots of people near the top. We're figuring things out. Jessica Andrade can still probably come back to the division as well. Let's just give her time. She looks like she has a fan base. She has support. We saw her on the main card in San Diego earlier in the year. Just calm down. It can be slow. It can be okay. That's it for this one. It was a good card. Lots of great reviews of it in the process. We got, look, even with that string of decisions in the middle, and it's 5 decisions in between a whole bunch of stoppages. They were entertaining fights. They were largely competitive fights, or fights that kept you engaged, even because Jonathan Pearson and Darren Elkins wasn't particularly competitive. It was a good night. And it was nice to see people reacting positively to a UFC event and being excited for going in and satisfied with coming out. And I hope that carries over as we get into these last couple of fights of the year. This was, as we talked about, a really great card that we needed after some not great fight night events. And hopefully it carries over and is sort of a catalyst to this week being filled with excitement for UFC 282, which we will continue to talk about the rest of the week. Just getting. All right.
I agree. No, I agree. I'm with you. I'm very excited for 282. I think there's a mishmash, right? The headliner didn't go the way that we wanted it to go, and there's some weirdness, and these things happen in MMA. But overall, I think there are some great fights on 282. I'm excited to break it down with the preview boys. I'm excited to do the next day takeaways after the event. And I agree. I think it's very easy to shit on MMA. It's very easy to shit on the UFC. But we should, as hard as we denigrate the UFC when things go bad, we should celebrate the UFC when things go well. And look, frankly, the UFC puts together a fight card, and it's the fighters that make it great. It's the fans that make it great. It's the comms guys that make it great. The UFC have an element of that because they have an overarching control over some of those, right? But at the end of the day, we must say when a good card is a good card. And top to bottom, this was a really good card.
So before we get out of here, I want to get your thoughts on this, because it's a thing that I've been seeing, and I notice and I pay attention to a lot because I'm a weirdo and these things stick in my head. There was lots of conversation on Saturday and coming out of this event about the UFC being back on the road, UFC being in front of a live audience, it not being the Apex. And you're somebody that doesn't usually have the volume on, doesn't usually watch with comms on, with all the audio and all of the sound. Do the fights themselves and does the action that you're watching feel different when it's an event like this in front of an audience versus when it's in the Apex? Obviously it looks different because you don't have the relatively bright, sparse kind of Apex setup. But do the fights themselves look and feel different to you?
Yes, they look different because of what you've just said, right? But on Saturday night, people were like holding their phones up, right? They had like their lights on. I don't really understand what that was for, right? I don't know whether that was to like distract the other fighters or whatever. I have no idea. But to me, as somebody that watches the fights to watch the actual fighting, not necessarily from an entertainment perspective, I actually enjoy, or I shouldn't say enjoy, I find the Apex easier to focus on because of that sparse background. Your brain says, well, don't focus on that. Like there's nothing interesting to look at there.
Right. You're not looking to see who's in the third row.
Right. But instead, when I was watching the fights on Sunday morning and Monday morning, I was noticing the mobile phones in the background. I was noticing the people moving around in their chairs and doing whatever. So from my perspective, from an analyst's perspective, I will say that I prefer the Apex. But certainly, I think there is something more special about when the UFC goes and there's fans in the arena. And I do think that reflects into the way that the fighters fight sometimes. I think when it's at the Apex, when there's nobody there, your brain can be
tricked into thinking it's a sparring session.
Correct. Whereas when there is 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 drunk screaming Floridians or whatever, then it's very hard to trick yourself that it's a sparring session.
Right. Yeah. It's very, very seldom that you're in the home of the NBA's Orlando Magic in front of 14,000, 15,000, whatever it is, crazy rabid fans for sparring. And if you are, it's a pretty interesting sparring I'd like to see. But that is the thing I wanted your thoughts on, because I know I fall in the same place as you. I'm watching the fights for the fights themselves, for analysis sake of the athletes. I don't care about everything that's going on around it. But in talking to enough of these men and women, they have all mentioned, and most of them mention, I need to be out there in front of a crowd. And so it's going to be interesting to see over these next few events, which are UFC 282, obviously taking place at T-Mobile Arena. We'll see what that's like. And then we go back to the Apex to close out the year with Cannonier and Strickland. It is a thing I want to make a point of watching as we get into 2023, as the UFC ideally gets back on the road a little bit more, to see if we see a shift in, because I also think there's a little bit of a shift in the way that people perceive them, the way that people take in the events and talk about the events. I think there's a portion of the fight loving public that is just sick of seeing Apex events because there is that sameness to them. It is a very, everything feels the same as it always does. And so just curious to see. We'll keep an eye on it. We will pay attention to it going forward. But for now, we will bid you adieu. I am Spencer Kite. Follow me on Twitter at Spencer Kite. He is Harry Powell. Follow him at BJJ_Harry Powell. Go read the Severe Spotlight on Sergey Pavlovich. It is up now on severemma.com. Go sign up for the Severe Patreon, severemma.com/pints, the best URL in the business. We will be back here, as Harry mentioned earlier, next week, same bat time, same bat channel, for the severe takeaways for UFC 282. Until then, good friends, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you then.